This is the story of how I made Princess Anna's ball gown and wore it to a real-life ball. It was a lot more complicated than I was anticipating, but it was so worth it. I started with the skirt, which is made up of strips of various different shades of green fabric. Now, finding these specific shades of green fabric was a little bit difficult. I had to go to both Joann's and Hobby Lobby in order to get the right greens. And the skirt ended up being way more complicated than I was originally anticipating. I thought, hey, great, a skirt made up of a bunch of stripes. This will be easy. But it turns out that the way her dress twirls is very specific because of the way that the stripes are laid out. So I couldn't just take stripes of fabric and sew them together. I had to make sure that the dark green stripes were going to end up behind the other stripes with how I pleated it, and I also needed to make sure that the dark green stripes were tapered at the top so that the skirt would be wider at the bottom without having to have too much extra bulk at the waist. And that ended up being a lot more tricky than I thought it would. A lot of measuring and readjusting and remeasuring and recalculating for what I thought was going to be a very simple skirt. At long last, all of the skirt panels were sewn together after a lot of sewing and seam finishing. Now, as you can see, I still had to finish off the top and bottom edges. They were pretty messy, but I had most of the work done, and I even had most of the little diamonds already sewn on. I used dark and light pink felt to create the diamond patterns that are so iconic on Anna's skirt. Now, I tried to do most of them before I sewed the skirt panels together, but I wasn't able to because I was running out of time, and I actually had to wear the dress to the ball before all of the detail work was done, but that was okay. I still got compliments on it and people thought it was really, really neat. I decided to have the skirt close in the back with a sort of historically inspired tie that uses a flap that overlaps to make sure that there's not a gap. Now, the skirt did end up being a little bit too big, which caused some embarrassing wardrobe malfunctions. So what I'm going to do before I wear it again is install some hooks and eyes to attach the skirt to the bodice in a few places to avoid that happening again. Now onto the bodice. I used the Renaissance Fair bodice that I had made for a previous event as a starting off point for the pattern. I used a black denim fabric that I found at Joann's, which had a nice bulk to it and also was a bit stretchy, which was great. Additionally, for some extra structure, I sandwiched a layer of fabric stiffener, or I guess kind of like a inner lining or something like that I found in the remnant section at Joann's, which worked pretty well. I put a couple pieces of boning just to prevent any curling up where I didn't want it to or wrinkling, and I comprised the corset entirely out of just two main types of panels. There were two back panels and one front panel. It closed with a zipper, which didn't end up being the right kind of zipper because there was a little flap hanging off the end, but oh well. And I attached little sleeve type thingies, which I'll show you how I made in a minute, in order to keep the bodice hanging onto my shoulders, and it also provides a great place to hide my bra straps because this corset is not a supportive corset. It's really just a bodice, it's not even a corset. If you turn it inside out, you can see that I did put in a faux seam in the front because it wasn't fitting quite tightly enough, and the side seams are pretty messy because I kept needing to take it in, but I just left that excess there in case I wanted to make adjustments, which I very well may in the future. So overall, it turned out quite nice, even if it's not quite perfect. Not bad for my first attempt at making something like this. I did run into the problem of the top seams trying to fray after I'd worn it, which I think I'm going to address by installing some binding or bias tape along the top to imitate that gold trim look that she has, and also keep the seams in check. The sleeves are very simple, just a couple rectangles of the cotton fabric I had left over with elastic to provide a nice ruffle and also keep them on my shoulders.
There's me. Hoo-yah!
The ball was absolutely magical. I had an amazing time with my brother and learned some really cool and surprisingly easy medieval dances, and met some really neat and amazing people. If you're ever in the Oklahoma area and you have a chance to attend the ball at the castle in Muskogee, I would highly recommend it. In the future, I may opt to wear this gown with either a petticoat or even a hoop skirt underneath it in order to achieve the same fullness that Anna gets with hers. Now, I know she doesn't appear to be wearing an actual hoop skirt, but her skirt does have a certain amount of volume that I just can't quite get without having some sort of structure underneath. And also, she does appear to be wearing some sort of ruffled petticoat underneath her gown. Sometimes I have to remind myself that movie animation physics and actual real-life dress physics sometimes don't line up. So I may have to wear an additional garment that Anna doesn't have to, and that's okay. For the first time in forever, there'll be music, there'll be light. For the first time in forever, I'll be dancing through the night. Can't tell if I'm elated or gassy, but I'm somewhere in that zone. 'Cause for the first time in forever, I won't be all alone.